Hey, so this is Mon or Soup, and this is the coloring tutorial that I promised to give you guys. So this is just gonna be a quick tutorial showing you the different coloring tricks that I use when I'm doing digital art. I use a lot of shortcuts, and most of them are for Paint Tool SAI, but I think all of the things I'll show you here are available on Photoshop and GIMP and other stuff, except my brush settings. So the main tools I use are my pen, brush, and water tools. I'll show you how they work in like a little bit. So pause the video if you wanna see the brush settings, or just go to my blog's FAQ. So here's a quick rundown of all the different tools I use. There's the basic stuff for layer settings. The ones are like clipping group, preserve opacity, selection source, overlay, multiply, and all those other stuff. So you can see I usually use my water brush. It works good for blending and drawing, but it's better to blend with my brush tool, but it can't draw alone on an empty canvas. So I like to switch between both of them when I'm coloring stuff. I try to make my sketches really rough, so my line art comes out pretty flexible, but if you can't do that, that's pretty fine. So when I color like this, I want to make sure that there's no gaps in the line art or anything. So when I select the entire drawing, I want to make sure there's no gaps in the line art so I can fill it in later. And take note that I can't use the bucket tool on my water brush tool because my water brush is soft and the bucket tool doesn't work very well on that. So I like to select everything around it, then hit invert selection, so I'll select everything on the inside. Then I'll use Ctrl F to bucket tool it in. I'll also click on preserve opacity so that I don't color outside of the layer. So some people asked how I do my color palettes, and I usually like to start with doing a background first so I can see, have a visualization of how the whole thing is gonna go. I always like picking a gradient, and maybe I'll figure out the background later after that. You can also look up videos on how to use color theory, and how to apply the color wheel in your drawings, and that'll be really helpful when you're trying to pick out color palettes. This one is just simply from yellow to pink because they're all next to each other on the color wheel. I want to make sure that my colors match the color palette that I'm using, and right now I'm just picking out colors that are closer to pink because that's the main color I'm going for. Like Marceline's skin is originally a really light blue, but it doesn't really match, so I'll go a little closer to pink, and I'll go for a grayer kind of purple. It kind of looks like blue, but since it's grayish and also on the pinker side, it matches the palette. It's a lot easier to go near gray, especially if the color you're going for is really far from your color palette, because gray's pretty neutral. Anyway, I'm gonna pick a light source and shade accordingly to it. I'll use purple for my shading because purple is next to pink, and oh god, I can't explain this. It's, color theory and all. Okay. I'll use purple as my dark purple and pink, and yellow as my light color. So I'll color everything like that so the entire thing looks pretty balanced. So after I'm done coloring it, the first thing I want to show you guys is the overlay setting on your layers. I usually use it to make the colors brighter, or so it will bring out a certain color. Like, for example, if I use red, it's gonna bring out all the red colors, even in not red. But it's usually nice to stick to a grayer kind of overlay bucket so that it doesn't oversaturate the drawing. I want to bring out yellow in one part and pink in another part, so I will color one part yellow and another part pink. So after that, I'm gonna put a clipping group above my coloring layer. Clipping group is like, if you set it on clipping group, it can only draw on the layer it's clipped on, which is the one right underneath it. So you'll see a pink line next to the layer that's on clipping group. I'll switch this one on luminosity, which usually is what I use to give my drawings that glowy effect that you all seem to like so much. So going for my light source, I'll use light yellow since that's the light source I'm using, and I'll pick out some highlights on Marceline's back. It's not really affecting the line art, so I'll put both the line art and the color layer into a layer set because I want both of them to be hit by the light, and then I'll put the clipping group of the luminosity on the layer set and everything inside will be affected. So the next kind of layer I want to show you guys is multiply, which is usually what I use to shade stuff. It's a lot like the shading layer, except it keeps colors brighter and more intact, but still sets them on a darker tone on top of all the stuff underneath. And then I'll use a really quick pink to brush it over and maybe add a few hints of purple at it. So after that, I'll make another luminosity layer to add more light and use the airbrush tool to make it glow a little bit, but since it's a little too hard, I'll set the opacity to about 25%. Next, I'm gonna show you guys how I paint stuff. Really simple this time. I'm just gonna use the same techniques, line it and then color it. Note that you can use the transparency difference on the bucket tool or the selection tool, and it'll show you how strong it'll go against lines. So if I set it too high, it's going to go straight through really thin lines, and if I set it too low, it might not even touch a line and leave that awkward white space in between the color and the line, and that's just plain ugly. So after I color the coloring layer underneath the line out, I'll merge them both so I can paint both of them at the same time. I'll mostly use the water brush tool because my brush tool blends colors together and it's just going to blend the black with the blue, which is really ugly. I'll usually switch between both of those, so I can't really explain this part. It's just a matter of picking shadows. I'll use same kind of color palette with light blue as my lightest color and purple as my darkest color, so I'll just shade according to that. I'll hit preserve opacity so that it doesn't color outside the shape I'm working on, and I can use really big brushes and it won't go past the lapis, you know. So after that, I'll add an overlay layer and set it to blue so I can bring out some of the blues in the drawing, since it's a really blue drawing. Blue, okay, blue sounds weird now. And then I'll play with the saturation and brightness on the painting to make the colors pop out a little more, which, you know, I don't usually do this often, but sometimes if the colors look a little too dull, it's nice to cheat a little bit. Anyway, so the next technique is the shortest one and pretty much my fastest one. It's mostly shortcuts and it only works when I'm doing hard shading, so you can see it in my comics and all my self-shaded work. I'll do some really quick line art of Ford, and then I'll set the line art layer on selection source. This black lined layer here. Selection source means that if I use the bucket tool and click bucket tool on selection source, it means that I can color on another layer and bucket tool on another layer that does not have the line art, and it'll still color as if the line art was on that layer. This is the part where I start using shortcuts. I'll take the multiply layer with a really bright color and start adding shadows. Then I'll set it down to about 50% so it still shows the colors underneath and it's not too hard. Then I'll hit preserve opacity and use the airbrush tool to put some darker colors. So you'll see here I use red, and then I'll just pick out some purples and maybe a little blue. And then I'll do the same thing with the luminosity layer on 20%, and that's pretty much it. It's that easy. That's pretty much all I have for now. I'm sorry for my voice, but I hope I answered all your questions. I hope this was helpful enough, and remember that there's a really loose guides on how I do my techniques and how I use my shortcuts, so you shouldn't follow it super religiously, just loosely. It's always better to practice and play with your own settings, whatever program you use, and you'll find your own tricks eventually. I'll see you guys next time. If there's anything you want me to cover, I'll try to make more tutorials like this in the future, and I'll see what I can answer for you in case there's anything in my art that you think I haven't covered enough in my videos. Okay, bye.